Welcome back, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. This is TV Podcast Industries. We're back with a bonus episode of our Picard podcast, talking about issue 3 of Star Trek Picard Countdown. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. I am one of your other hosts, John. Yes, this is our little bonus episode as we review and discuss the final issue in the 3-part comic series, Star Trek Picard Countdown.
Yeah, we did discuss the other 2 issues of the series on our preview podcast, but the third one of the Countdown comic series hadn't come out before the series started on TV, so we waited till that came out. It just came out this week on the 29th of January on the normal Wednesday comic day. So we thought we'd finish off our series where myself and John discussed the comic books. First up, if you haven't read the comic books, this is going to spoil the whole comic book series for you. John, generally, overall, do you think this is an essential thing for people to buy?
I don't think it's essential. I don't think it's essential for Star Trek Picard. But if you like Star Trek, if you are a fan of Jean-Luc Picard and The Next Generation, then this is another adventure that he goes on. It does introduce Rafi. It introduces Laris and Zhaban, the 2 Romulans that we see in episode 1 of Star Trek Picard, the TV series. So it does introduce characters here for the series, and it's just a neat little contained story. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, if you're a fan of comics, then it's certainly worth a gander, but it's certainly not essential. It's nice that it's in the Romulan universe, and I think it actually is best when you see it as part of a bigger whole with the Star Trek short Children of Mars, and this all leading into Star Trek Picard. So I think if you're a collector of comics and you're a collector of maybe this series or will be in the future, then this is an integral part of it. I think my main kind of thing about this is that because this final issue, issue 3, was postponed, and put back till the 29th of January after Star Trek Picard had started on Amazon Prime, I was feeling there was going to be a bigger bang for the buck.
I agree.
To be honest, in this issue, whether it was something to do with Picard and Rafi, whether it was something to do with the machinations of the Romulans, certainly after episode 2, I thought there was going to be some kind of bigger payoff. And that's why they had postponed it till after the start, because otherwise it would have affected the viewing of episodes 1 and 2. So, and it doesn't, in all honesty, but it does have a little surprise for sure.
But it is written by one of the executive producers, Kristen, so the characterization that's in the comic, particularly issue 2, I think, gives us some good characterization of the characters that we've seen on Star Trek Picard as well. So there are some good things about it, and we will be going into full spoiler-filled detail on the comic books from here. So if you have read it, or you don't intend to read it, listen on here. If you do intend to read it, head on out, pick up a copy of it. I think it's coming out in a collected edition in a couple of weeks' time as well. And as I mentioned, we have already covered the first 2 issues on our Star Trek Picard preview podcast. Head back there to see our thoughts on the first 2 issues.
And remember, we are covering the full series as well of Star Trek Picard, where it's currently on episode 2. We will be heading into episode 3 in this coming week, the first week in February. And of course, we'll be going all the way through to episode 10. So if you are just simply have found this by accident, or if you're just joining us, remember you can subscribe and rate us, leave a review over on any Starfleet supporting podcast player of your choice. Just head on over to tvpodcastindustries.com and you can find podcast catchers for you to listen to. There's Spotify, there's Stitcher, there's Apple Podcasts, you name it. It's all out there. So, yes, welcome to have you on board, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. Yes, we'll get into our spoiler-filled review.
I completely forgot last time to read out our usual details of who gave us the issue as well, so I'm going to read them out here. The issue was written by Kristen and Mike Johnson. Kristen is a producer on Star Trek Picard. The art is by Angel Hernandez, colours by Joana Lafuente, letters by Neil Uyetake, and edits by Chase Marotz. John, do you want to tell us the story so far from issues 1 and 2 of this comic book, Star Trek Picard Countdown?
Sure. After discovering an impending supernova threatening the Romulan Empire, the Federation launches an evacuation mission of unparalleled scale to evacuate every threatened planet in the Romulan space. Admiral Jean-Luc Picard travels to a Romulan colony to evacuate the 10,000 inhabitants living there, only to discover 5 million native beings that the Romulans intend to leave behind to die. Picard is imprisoned by the governor before he can alert the Federation to this new development, but manages to launch a daring escape with the help of 2 Romulan defectors, Laris and Zhaban. Meanwhile, the governor of the colony contacts Picard's ship, the Verity, and convinces them to let her on board, where she manages to seize control of USS Verity.
Excellent. That's a really good recap of the first 2 issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's go into some details about the storyline for this one first, John, and then we'll go into where it leaves us at the end of the story, and then what we thought overall of the 3-issue series of Star Trek Picard. So the issue begins with the former Tal Shiar members, Zhaban and Laris, turning Picard and Rafi over to the Romulan leaders on Uyetake. Picard is trying to contact his ship, which has been taken over by the Romulan governor, Joana. Interesting start to the issue here, where Zhaban and Laris are using their connections to try and turn Picard and Rafi over, but he's trying to actually get contact with the ship effectively and trying to see if this is a way, using diplomatic means once again, to allow him contact the USS Verity.
Yeah, it's a nice little double cross, really. I mean, actually, I think I didn't immediately pick out the Romulan officers coming in as Laris and Zhaban, to be honest. So, it was kind of nice when they got close up that it was them, and it was this double cross, so that Picard could then contact Verity to inform them that he'd been captured, that there was a double cross. And of course, in making contact with Verity, he gets through to the governor and her second in command, who is holding the lieutenant commander who has been left in charge of the Verity hostage, as well as their crew, or so we think.
Yeah, I do like this because it's a nice idea here that he's talking to them, and the whole time there's another plan playing out. Effectively, we hear that his team aboard the Verity are obviously working on ways to get rid of these invading Romulans, I suppose, these people who've taken over their ship. I like that little moment where Picard says, "You may feel a little tingle as their plan comes to fruition," and Governor Joana is transported into her now prison aboard the ship.
On the brig, into her holding cell. So yeah, it's nice. I like the fact that, you see them taking command of Verity in Picard's ready room, but the starship is manned by a whole load of people doing engineering, security, medical, catering, who knows it, so the idea that they simply had control of it is kind of crazy, but I like the fact that, these unseen other members of the Verity effectively foil the plan and transport the governor and her second command into their prison on board the Verity.
Yeah, exactly. Good little one. I like that Picard again goes to Governor Joana to try and explain to her why he's there. They still have this completely untrustworthy relationship where she thinks that Starfleet are just trying to get all the information about the Romulans out of them. They're still not there just to save them, kind of thing. And then it's revealed that Zhaban is the one that gave her the information that allowed her to take control of the Verity. This happens as a Tal Shiar ship arrives to execute the end of their plan, effectively. So
yeah, I mean, this is the moment where you feel that Laris and Zhaban have done their own double bluff on Jean-Luc Picard. And I really like in this that Laris steps back and says, "No, I'm not with you anymore." And you still feel that Zhaban is going ahead with the plan, where he gave them incomplete codes so that they couldn't fully take control of the Verity. He has the full code in which to do that in order to take control of the ship, effectively to disable it more than anything else. And then that him and Laris would get on board this Tal Shiar Romulan ship as it arrives, and they will then get blown into outer space. Effectively, that the Tal Shiar don't believe this Federation rescue effort that is being spearheaded by Starfleet. They'll stop at nothing to prevent Starfleet from carrying out this plan, because they just feel it's a way of undermining the Romulan Empire, of undermining their own independence, and they feel that there are ulterior motives behind this. And I think that makes sense for the Romulans. You know, they would be suspicious of this act of kindness in a way, or the altruism of it. They feel that there are bigger, darker secrets around this seemingly peace mission by the Federation. And so what gets uncovered here is the fact that the Tal Shiar are waiting at numerous Romulan outposts that will get consumed by the supernova when it finally goes, in order to prevent this evacuation.
It's almost like as if they're saying that anybody that gets evacuated by Starfleet is joining Starfleet and joining their cause and leaving the Romulans' cause, kind of thing. So I like the reveal from Zhaban that he is no longer part of Tal Shiar. He has totally agreed with everything that Laris has said to him, and he has been converted to that side. And the reason he's no longer part of Tal Shiar is he realizes they only want to save Romulan lives, not all of the lives in the system. And he believes everybody's life is a Romulan life if they live in the system, kind of thing. So
and is under Romulan jurisdiction, effectively.
Yeah, so a nice reminder, I suppose, of that line from the first episode of Star Trek Picard, where Picard is saying, it's not Romulan lives, it's just lives here. And that's why there's an instant connection between Laris and Zhaban and Picard, and the mission, effectively, is that they agree exactly the same way. Everybody needs to be evacuated. Everybody possible needs to be evacuated. You can't pick and choose who's going to go. So that's the big reveal, I suppose. But there is a moment, definitely, when I was reading it going, this is why they were saving it. Because,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, Zhaban is definitely still at Tal Shiar. He's still hidden here. But if they reveal that in the comic book and not in the TV show, it might be too big of a reveal, right?
Exactly. But my suspicion of Zhaban still remains for the TV show as well. And I think this continues that layer of doubt that I have about him.
Right.
But he also does seem to be redeemed in this moment as well. So it could be that red herring, effectively.
Exactly.
And, you know, red herrings always play with overactive imagination. So, but all the while, then the commander on the Tal Shiar ship is saying to Zhaban, you know, execute the order, acknowledge, so that they can fire their photons at the Verity. But in the meantime, then 2 Romulan warships arrive to ward off this Tal Shiar ship, which effectively decloaks and goes into hyperspace immediately. And so the plan is foiled, and this knowledge of what the Tal Shiar are trying to do can then be communicated across the rest of the evacuation effort.
Yeah. That kind of closes out the story. We have the wrap up, really, where the Starfleet effort to evacuate the Romulan planets gets more ships. We hear that they're about to ramp it all up. Picard offers the place for Zhaban and Laris to come to Earth in hiding. As we know from episode 2, the reason why he's saying to hide on Earth is because they believe the Tal Shiar wouldn't mount any kind of offensive on Earth, so it's the safest place to be. Now, where we are in the TV show is we think that may not be the safest place for the two of them to be because of a possible infiltration on Earth by the Romulans in episode 2. So it's intriguing that that's one thing that kind of comes out of the comic book. These two are told, come to Earth, you'll be absolutely fine, no problem at all. And then there is actually a presence of the Romulan Tal Shiar on Earth. So I thought that was quite interesting. Issue ends with him calling Geordi LaForge.
Yeah, which is really nice.
Yeah, who's still working on shipbuilding over Mars. And tells LaForge the future is bright, very bright indeed. Everything's going fine now. We've had the only trouble we're going to have in Romulan space now. It'll be grand, Geordi, he says, as the issue ends.
Yes, which, as we know from the Children of Mars, as well as now into episode 2, Mars really does take a beating from the rogue synths. And so there's this big question, certainly, that we had as to whether Geordi LaForge was caught up in that, and maybe has been killed in the attack by the rogue synths. So, yeah, this is a really poignant end, potentially. However, in episode 2, there is mention of Geordi LaForge.
Yeah, Zhaban's talking to Picard in that episode and says to him, do you want to get your crew together? Do you want to get Riker or Worf, or do you want to get LaForge? So there is a moment where it's effectively confirmed that Zhaban is aware of who LaForge is, and that LaForge is still alive as well. So it's pretty much confirmed that he's alive after this moment. But it's odd, isn't it? This kind of cliffhanger moment in our heads, because we're going, we know that planet blows up pretty soon or goes on fire pretty soon with massive explosions everywhere, and Geordie's sitting directly over it. Especially that moment, as I say, with Picard going, everything will be fine, the future's bright. That's usually the moment that precedes some major horror for a character. It'll all be grand, everything will work out. It's never an ending that you expect on a comic like this. I wanted to just quickly go through just some of the things that the comic gave us in general, I suppose. We do see Picard continuing to use any kind of diplomatic means to save the life in the galaxy and for everyone in the Romulan space that could be affected by this supernova. So that's quite a very fundamental part, I suppose, of Picard's attitude to things. He's not one to use violence. We even see that moment at the beginning where Zhaban cuts down the Romulans who don't want to allow Picard to call the ship. But Picard's kind of standing back going, well, I kind of wish this would happen differently. But thanks for saving my life to Zhaban.
Yeah, I think you really do see the procedural Jean-Luc Picard here. And we see this in episode 2 as well. And it's one of our big points of the podcast, our episode 2 discussion, because he gets cut down by another admiral in Starfleet, Admiral Clancy. So this is still very much a part of him. In going through the procedure, making sure that everyone's on board, very much by peaceful means as well. At the end of the day, they were a scientific mission. So that still kind of continues, that mindset of going in peace and with objectivity. Yeah. It is still very much there, I think, with Jean-Luc Picard for sure. Yeah.
The other thing I said it gave us is, it removes Laris from the table of being a double agent. She very much is confirming.
Definitely.
I'm out. I'm done. I'm not involved with these people at all. I said exactly the same as you, John. I said it does kind of keep Zhaban on the table as a spy. It says in here, really, he only gives up on the Tal Shiar because he believes they don't want to save everyone. Not because he has different beliefs in the Tal Shiar's actual mission, their regular mission of keeping Romulan people safe, really.
Yeah.
So he believes their mission of keeping Romulan people safe means everybody in the Romulan sphere, effectively. But he believes that they just want Romulans only, kind of thing. So that doesn't necessarily mean he's out of the Tal Shiar. It just means for this particular moment, he wanted to save more people, I suppose. What it doesn't give us in this, and this is where my kind of disappointment, you're going to probably hear that a little bit as we get into my thoughts on the whole issue series. What it doesn't give us is the things that I was really expecting. It doesn't give us the big moment of the supernova or Mars attack, which I really thought they were holding back on for the issue. I thought they were going, okay, well, we have to show that on the TV show, the attack on Mars. We're going to show it there first. But you could have had that shown in the comic book.
Definitely.
And it would have really helped it to feel like a necessary piece.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that, it is 14 years later, in the Amazon Prime show. And yet I'm still not really clear whether the supernova has happened. That, there's talk in the comic that it could be next year. It could be sort of next month. Yeah. Or it could be, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. I think we get in the first issue of this comic, really nice moment of it's like watching a clock but not knowing how the countdown's going. Yeah. And it's a really nice kind of aspect of the first issue of the comic. And yet the main reference in the show is about the rogue synths attacking Mars, caught up because it was done on First Contact Day. Yeah. And the mission to save the Romulans from the supernova, but no real account as to whether the supernova has actually happened or not. Yeah, I get you. And you would have thought it would be nice to know actually where the Romulan race stands at the moment. I mean, I think the reclamation site on the Borg ship, you kind of feel that they're kind of, scrounging around in the dustbin a bit of the galaxy or of different star systems to try and rebuild the Romulan race. But it's just not really too clear whether Romulus still exists or whether that was caught up in the supernova and all these other planets. And I think that would have been nice to have just had the supernova go off in the comics for sure.
Absolutely. And this is kind of where the whole universe of Star Trek comes into play, isn't it? Where there's so much things that happen that you may have to know or may not have to know for this to kind of come into your mind. But the Star Trek movie, J.J. Abrams movie, started with the supernova that happened effectively. So this is dealing with the repercussions of it in
in Star Trek Picard, I suppose, in this time, 14 years later.
But that got Vulcan, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then Romulus, or the Romulan planets were caught up in that then.
Yeah, it led to this supernova that's happening now in Picard's time, I suppose. But that's something that you may not have caught at all. You know, not many people would connect all of these things. That movie came out a long time ago. Maybe people haven't watched it in a long time either. But it's one of those things where you're going, well, just make a definitive answer in here. If you're going to write a comic book and you're going to expect people to buy it, make a definitive statement about what exactly happened and what's carrying off. It feels like towards the end of this comic that either they were going to do 4 issues and they had another issue to do the big moment where there's the attack on Mars, something like that, or they were saying, actually, well, let's just turn this into one mission that happened on the saving planets thing that Picard was doing, and he's going to save another 20 planets, so that'll give us the ability to go out and do another 3 or 4 stories. Because the other thing that isn't in here is there's no resolution as to why Picard left Starfleet. There's nothing in there at all on that. And there's no break between Rafi and Picard, the 2 other things that we're aware of that happen in the TV show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we only get a glimpse of Rafi in episode 2 on the TV show. And I suppose, you know, this is another thing with this comic, is that because it comes out after the 2 episodes of the TV show, effectively, the other comics were apart from that. So you were judging them on their own and anticipating the build-in and the connection into the series.
Yeah.
Now that the series has come, you do go, I wish there had been a bit more about Rafi.
Yeah.
Now, coming into episode 2, we see Rafi at the end, and I'm sure episode 3 will have a lot more to bring on that relationship, and certainly for the rest of the series as well.
Yeah.
But it just would have been nice to have gotten that extra little step in the storyline of the comics to see how Rafi and Picard, how their relationship really was. You know, okay, it can't be as deep as Riker and him and Jean-Luc, but, you know, just she seems like a really interesting character from the show in the 5 minutes at the end of episode 2.
And she seemed like an interesting character in the first 2 issues of the comic. She's completely sidelined in here.
Exactly.
And is used as kind of a sounding board towards the end of this book.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels like it could have been anybody in these last few pages. It doesn't feel like her character. Similar to what you were saying about Zhaban and Laris. Sometimes you're like, well, they're just drawn as Romulans, so I don't know whether it's them in the background or not. It takes dialogue to tell you who they are, you know? Any other thoughts on the comic book overall, John? Anything that you want to say about it before we go into whether you recommend it or not?
I think for me, it's more just that I'm not entirely sure why they postponed it till after the episode.
Right.
There isn't a great deal here, I think, that spoils the series of Star Trek Picard. The only bit may be around Zhaban. But I think there's still a bit of suspicion. As you say, he's still on the table as potentially being maybe slightly doubtful as to his true intentions, you know.
Well, like, for example, you know, he kind of says the reason why he's gone from the Tal Shiar is because of Laris and the love for her. You know, it still has on the table for me after reading it. What if something happens to Laris? Please not, because I absolutely love the character in the show. What if something happens to her? Does that mean he goes, my love's gone for her because she's died, and I'm now going to go back to the Tal Shiar? You know, is it something like that happens? Does he turn back on the Federation if something happens to Laris that's their fault? You know, you just can't tell from this here. And I was hoping to get a little bit more out of these, where the little bit, even as I say, even something that will be repeated on the TV show or has been repeated on the TV show, like the attack on Mars being in here, might have made it feel a bit more essential.
Yeah, exactly. But I think with that, Derek, what are your thoughts on these 3 issues of the Star Trek Picard Countdown comic?
Generally, I like the story, don't get me wrong. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's enjoyable to see these characters in a situation, but by the end of it, it felt like just a standard mission that could have been told in any of the comic books. It didn't even feel like something that was necessarily as you'd say, canon connection to Star Trek Picard. It's just the first time you meet some of these characters. The characterization, I think, of Rafi in the first 2 issues was really good, and that made me excited about seeing her on the TV show. And then there's almost nothing in the third issue at all. And I was kind of hoping that you get a bit more banter with her, you get a bit more leadership out of her, just to get a bit more impression of who she is. And then Laris and Zhaban, I feel they're almost unrecognizable to who we see in the TV show. But remember, they've been resting on Earth for the last 14 years, working with and being alongside Jean-Luc on Earth in his chateau. So that may have changed them quite significantly, of course. But I felt like this was a great opportunity to give you a little backstory of who each of these characters were. And I think it kind of missed the mark for that. And if you're going to do a 3-episode series and say it's tied into the show, that's pretty much the only goal, right?
Tie it into the show.
Tie it in and give some backstory, give some additional stuff that you don't necessarily going to throw out an exposition on the TV show. So give a little bit of exposition in the comics.
Yeah, I mean, it does in the sense that it gives you the context of the supernova and what Picard was trying to do in rescuing the planets that would be consumed by the supernova. So it does, and it ties it into the Mars attack through this unprecedented ship building in order to rescue all these people. You know, for me, this issue, I would give it 3 Romulan warships out of 5.
Okay.
I think overall, I'd probably give the comic series 3.5 out of 5. I think in and of itself, it's a nice little story. It needed to tie some of the characters more to Jean-Luc Picard. And I think in particular Rafi, not so much. I think Laris and Zhaban, I think this is a really good introduction of them, to be honest. And I think that's really good to have. I think it adds another layer to the Picard, this story that they're telling on the TV show, for sure. But it is very much kind of an episode of the TV show. It talks about a single rescue mission of a planet by Admiral Picard.
That's actually a good way to say it. It actually feels more like an episode of The Next Generation, where it has a start, middle, and end, 3 issues, and the end is everything's wrapped up and I'm going to move on to next week's mission, which is not what even Star Trek Picard, the TV show, is like, right?
Exactly.
The TV show feels like every week you get a cliffhanger, so you're moving to the next part of this 10-hour movie almost. So this doesn't feel like something that is directly connected into the show. It feels like here's a mission that happened with the characters that you know on the TV show.
Exactly. I mean, in a nutshell, it's not essential, but it's a good read. Yeah, exactly.
Since people have to wait a week in between episodes of the show, it's something to tide you over until the next episode.
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of the next episode, we'll be back with Picard on TV Podcast Industries for episode 3 as soon as the review embargo lifts at 6 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and 2 p.m. GMT next Thursday, the 6th of February. Make sure you subscribe to tvpodcastindustries.com to get our thoughts about that episode when it comes out. Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this little snippet of a discussion around the 3rd comic issue. Remember, keep your feedback coming in on the TV series for episodes 1, 2, and of course for 3 once it airs next week across the galaxy. And of course, we would love to hear from you. It's been great listening to people's thoughts and feedback so far on episodes 1 and 2. And of course, yes, we will be back with the TV show right through from episode 3 to the end with episode 10. And don't forget to check out the 10 Forward pub quiz as well that is being done each episode of our podcast.
Absolutely, yeah. You can send any thoughts into us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. You can join us over in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. And if you want to support the podcast, you can go over to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries and support us over there. Of course, you can also share the episodes with your friends. Sharing the podcast is sharing the love. Thank you so much once again for joining us for a bit more Star Trek Picard. Even just a short bit of bonus. Star Trek is still good, right?
Absolutely. As always, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and we'll be back again shortly. Just remember, keep watching, keep listening, and engage.
Bye.
Bye.